Okay, I think we are officially live. So we've got quite a few people who have joined already. Let's give it another minute and then we'll kick things off because it's a tight program, Sebastian, isn't it?
It is. It is definitely.
So we'll see how far we get with our presentation. All right. Cool. I think we can start off with the introduction, and then as more people join, I think they'll be able to catch up. So thanks to everyone who's live with us. We are very excited to give you a little bit of an insight into the EU GPSR regulation, which has obviously been quite the change in the product safety and compliance landscape in recent weeks and months. We have a bit of a change that I want to point out. We initially said this webinar is going to be with myself and with Yassine, but Yassine had to drop out this morning for some emergency reasons. But we found an exceptional replacement. We found Sebastian to join at short notice and essentially take over his role as the product compliance specialist on this webinar. Quick introduction. Sebastian, do you want to start just saying a few words about yourself?
Yes, we have only some seconds, so let me introduce myself. I was a market surveillance officer, so it's comparable to trade and standards in UK for 10 years here in Germany, and switched over to the industry, to retail industry, to JYSK, comparable to IKEA. So I was in touch with a lot of product compliance questionnaires and products worldwide, buying, retailing all over the EU for 10 years. After that, I found my own business, Fox Compliance, as a consulting agency for whoever wants and needs some advices. So I'm glad to join today and explain something about the GPSR, because this is one of the main and the focus actually on regulations on product compliance. And thank you, Jonas, for inviting me. And that was quite short in the morning, but hopefully we can answer all questions which will be raised up today.
Yes, fantastic. Thanks, Sebastian. Just quickly, a few words on myself. So I'm Jonas, Managing Director at Edge Comply. As you can probably tell by my accent, just like Sebastian, I'm German originally, but I live in London, which is also where Edge Comply is based. So just to give you a little bit of context on the company behind the webinar. So we are Edge Comply. We are a product compliance firm, again, with offices here in London. We help brands make sure their products are safe and compliant. As simple as that. We help them with compliance all across the world. You can see a few of the countries that we cover up here. And our team consists of multiple experts in the product compliance and safety space who've all worked at large companies. All right, so that's just for the introduction. Quick agenda, because we are very tight on time, and it's quite a lot of ground to cover. So let's get right in. One thing I want to point out is that there's a little questions tab in the bottom right of your screen. If you have any questions, just pop them in there and we'll make sure to answer them either at the end of this webinar or afterwards via email. And then we'll just try to get through as many questions as we can. Okay, so you can see the agenda here, bigger picture first, and then we'll get right into the key obligations that you as fashion brands have to know about and have to comply with. So let's not waste any time and just get started on a little bit of background on GPSR. One thing that's important, and I think that most people will know, is that GPSR is already effective. So since December 13th, GPSR is in place. And again, you will all know that GPSR is a regulation that applies to companies that sell to the European Union, but also that sell to Northern Ireland. So I suppose that most all of the companies on the call will be in a situation where they sell to Europe and therefore have to comply with the GPSR. If you don't, there is usually fines of up to 2 million euros for smaller companies. And Sebastian, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it's 4% of annual turnover for larger companies. But it's
5%. Yes, correct.
Okay, so yeah, it's even worse. But for small companies, I believe it's about 2 million euros. So that's why it is important to know the basics and to know how to comply with GPSR. I think one thing that's good to understand is why have policymakers come up with this new regulation that at first seems like an annoyance to brands to deal with. It is simply because of the fact that there are still too many products out there that are causing harm. And we've got two examples here, two recent examples from the news where fashion products were in fact responsible for, in one case, nearly burning a girl to death. And in another case, Business Insider reported how fashion products contain way too many toxic chemicals, or at least certain apparel items. So why care? Why is GPSR important? First of all, it's obviously the fines, as we've said. I think for fashion brands in particular, one thing that's important to point out is that even regardless of the fines, if you want to sell to retail, if you want to sell through marketplaces, those retailers are also they are forced to enforce the GPSR regulation. So if you want to sell to retail in the future, if you're already selling to retail, you'll certainly sooner or later run into trouble if you don't comply with GPSR. Then there's the risk of custom confiscations here in the bottom left. And then lastly, to some extent, it's obviously just all of our responsibility as brands and people in product safety and compliance to make sure that we don't cause any harm in society. All right, key obligations. Sebastian, you mentioned that usually it takes you 90 minutes to go through a regular GPSR presentation. We've now tried to squeeze it into 30. But yeah, these are the aspects we're trying to cover. The ones that are bold, those are the aspects that we'll try to cover in terms of your obligations. There's essentially two buckets. One is prevention, the other one is correction. We'll focus mostly on prevention today. And when it comes to correction, that's probably its own topic or its own webinar. But let's focus on prevention and let's try to cover as much ground as we can. The first obligation is incident reporting. So if you are made aware or if you become aware of any safety incident arising from selling your products, then it's very important now, even more important than before, to immediately inform the authorities. And in Europe, there is, when you Google SafetyGate or Business Safety Gateway, I think it's called, Sebastian.
It was formerly the RAPEX database, and now it's a SafetyGate. Yes.
Got it. So this is a portal that the EU has set up where you submit your safety issue, your safety incident, and then with the GPSR, it's even more important than before that you inform your customers quickly. And again, we'll only cover this to a certain extent here, but just to give you a high level insight, you have to inform your customers as quickly as possible. All customers that are affected, meaning customers that have bought the same product that has caused the harm, those customers need to be informed immediately. And then there's a need for having public recall notices. You can see this example here on the right-hand side by Yoto here from the UK, where they recalled one of their speakers for kids. And these are the measures that you then have to implement or that you have to take as well. Sebastian, I think I'll go through these first three subjects pretty quickly, and then we'll spend most of our time on the risk assessment and technical documentation. So the second obligation that's really important is the complaints register. You have to set up a complaints register, which can come in any shape or form. You can see this snippet of one example that we've used for some of our clients. It's just a Google Sheet where you collect all the safety incidents that you hear about from your clients. So what's the difference between incident reporting and complaints register? Incident reporting is about serious injuries, accidents, and deaths, which hopefully will not occur. But it's about serious incidents that you have to report publicly. the complaints register is really more granular. So here it's important to really keep track of every single incident, even if it's super minor. Keep track of that and store that for 10 years. So in practice, what that means for brands is instruct your customer service team, who will be the ones who, especially if you sell direct to consumer, will learn about these things first. Instruct them to use this complaints register and to log all these complaints in here. And then there's one aspect or one clause in the GPSR where it also says you have to appoint a compliance manager internally so that responsibility for dealing with these issues is clearly handled. So even if it's just a minor incident, let's say somebody, perhaps there's an accessory that's a little sharp and somebody scratched him or herself, then that should be reported in here, and there should be, it says here, corrective action taken. So you should report what corrective action you have taken to avoid this happening in the future. Again, which could be, for example, that in the future, for future production batches, you use different accessories that are not as sharp. All right, EU responsible person. I think this is maybe the one that most people have heard about because it's the most obvious. If you sell to EU consumers or consumers in Northern Ireland, you cannot do that directly anymore if you're not an EU brand. You have to have an EU responsible person. So if we look at this little graphic down here in the bottom left, you can see as soon as you cross the border, as soon as your products cross the border and you try selling to consumers, you need to have one of these two options. You either need to appoint an authorized representative, or you need to use, if you sell to a retailer, if you sell to a retailer or an importer, let's put it this way, then those immediately become your authorized or your EU responsible person. If you sell directly to consumers through your website, for example, you need to appoint an authorized representative. And that's an EU company that you then, and that's where we get to labeling here on the right. This is a company whose address needs to be on your products. So the EU responsible person, business name, business address, and email address. So Sebastian and I had a quick chat about this. It should be the email. It should not even just be the website. It should be business name, business address, and email of your EU responsible person needs to be labeled on the product. Again, if you sell to an importer or a retailer, then their information needs to be on there, but it's your responsibility as the brand to make sure it's on the products. Sebastian, anything to add here? I think this is pretty straightforward, right?
Yeah, maybe if it is not possible to bring this labeling direct on the product, you have to have good arguments. If you shift over to the packaging, maybe, or maybe to an assembly instruction or to a manual, this is only possible if the item is too small or something get lost due to importing procedure or something like that. So the general rule, as Jonas already mentioned and highlighted here, it must be on the product. This is one of the sharpest thing that was regulated new in the EU market. And if you have this decision, you have to prove yourself, is it on the product or could it be potentially on the packaging or some delivery documents besides the product? Then you have to have good arguments on it.
Which is a great segue into the next topic, which is labeling requirements in general, beyond just the EU responsible person. So labeling requirements, it's quite an extensive topic, but in short, there are 3 items that you should be aware of. Item number 1, you need to have a unique identifier on your products. So what does that mean in the context of fashion? In the context of fashion, this could be an SKU code, for example. When we say unique identifier, it needs to be unique enough so that it points to a variant of your product. So it can't just say Gymshark leggings. It needs to point directly to, let's take Gymshark as an example, the Gymshark advanced leggings black S. So it needs to be as granular as the color and the size. That's really important. And that's something that wasn't as strict before, but now it's really important to have that on your labels. The other thing that's oftentimes overlooked is that the brand details, it says manufacturer details, but you are the manufacturer. Don't confuse that with your supplier overseas. Your details, aka your business name, address, and email or website. Is the website acceptable in this case, Sebastian, or does it have to be the email?
It must be on the product, and the traceability, and that makes it the product must traceable, identifiable, and also the EU responsible company and the manufacturer must be identifiable. And the email or the website, this is the reason which was regulated, because it must be an available contact to the responsible company to send accidents, to send injuries, something like that.
Yeah, that's a great point. So if you just print www.gymshark.com, that's not enough. You should ideally provide the email address because it's the most straightforward, and that can be contact@gymshark.com, or it should be gymshark.com/contact us, right, where you then have a form that people can use to actually contact you. So to summarize this one quickly, because I think this one can quickly become a little bit confusing. So that so what you need to have on your labels is your own brand details. So of your, let's say your UK company, then those details need to be on there, your business name, your address, and then you also need to have, as Sebastian pointed out, the EU responsible person, business name and address and email on there as well. Safety warnings, the third point, that one's a little less clear because it varies from product to product, and it's something we'll get to in a little bit when it comes to risk assessment, etc. But yeah, those three elements are really the most important. And
maybe let me add some points to the warnings. If you have pan-EU retail, that means you sell out your items maybe via Amazon, pan-EU in all countries, you have to give the safety warnings once in e-commerce online at the point of sale, so to say, online. But on the other hand, it must go with the item in the official language where the items are sold. And that means it could be potentially 24 different kind of languages. 24 different languages. The safety warnings must be in the language where the end consumer buy the item.
And that's something that many brands won't believe when they hear the first time because they can't believe they have to print it on there in 24 different languages. But if they sell to 24 countries in the EU where you have different languages, obviously in every country, then yeah, that's the case. Cool. So common questions related to labeling. One of the things we often get asked is, does it have to be on the labels in the product, the SON labels? And the answer is yes. As Sebastian mentioned this a couple of times, if possible, and that's how it's defined in the legal text, you can see it down here. If it's possible, you have to permanently, or you have to place the labels on the product. And only if that's not possible, and then you have to have that excuse that Sebastian talked about, the product is too small, it's for technical reasons not possible, then you can put it on the packaging. But for fashion items, it's usually always possible because you have the care label anyway. So it needs to be on there, and then it just needs to be multiple layers if necessary, if you have to cover multiple languages, for example. Can we use a QR code? No, that's a short answer. You can't. Digital labeling alone is not sufficient, so it should be printed on the product. Okay, risk assessment. I would say let's give it 7 minutes approximately, Sebastian, to go through risk assessment and technical documentation, and then we can get into questions. So risk assessment. This one's probably the trickiest part of everything because again, it really much varies from product to product, but in short, what GPSR says is that every single product on the market now has to go through a risk assessment. So you as the product team, you're responsible for conducting a risk assessment to make sure you identify the relevant risks and potential safety hazards to the consumer. And so when we go through that at Edge Comply with the brands that we work with, this is how we do it. So the first step is identify applicable standards and regulations that are already out there. Some of you will know that for fashion brands, and I think I'll just go here very quickly because this slide shows it. So here are some of the important standards and regulations that often apply in fashion. So some of you may have heard of the REACH regulation, there's the packaging waste regulation, there is other chemical compliance regulations such as the POPs regulation. So you need to identify those And those then already cover quite a few potential hazards. So what are the hazards, potential hazards in fashion? Well, it's a big part it's chemical hazards. So if you have toxic substances, that can cause harm, allergic reactions, or worse. It can be mechanical or physical elements. We talked about sharp edges, strangulation from cords, especially if you sell kids items. And it can be fire related, such as materials that are can easily catch fire, etc. So those are just. There's obviously more because every product is unique, but those are the three main buckets for fashion items. And again, just going back to this, so the first step is identify all applicable standards and regulations, really important, and then identify remaining hazards. So maybe even though you're complying with, let's say, REACH regulation, which is about making sure that certain substances are not in your textiles or in your fabrics, you then still need to identify remaining risks if they exist. And then the last step is you have to take measures to mitigate those risks. So it's not enough to just say, we have these risks, you actually have to do something about it. Sebastian, do you want to say something about this, or should we move on to technical documentation then?
I think that was fine. I already answered some questions in the chat and in the Q&A, so I was fine with these.
Okay, cool. Perfect. So technical documentation goes it's very closely related to the risk assessment, because the technical documentation, again, something that GPSR mandates every product needs to have, is you need to have. Think of a Google Drive folder, but you need to, there's no predefined format. But when we say technical documentation, you can think of a Google Drive folder where you store all the documents these are the three areas. So it's product identification, it's characteristics, and it's risk assessment and mitigation. So product identification, what does that mean? Oftentimes you as the product team, you'll have files already anyway where you store the different product names that you have linked to different SKUs, so that when your product is in circulation and somebody contacts you or the market authorities that they have found, product XYZ with the SKU code ABC, that you then have the possibility to link that to some product. I think that's pretty straightforward, and most companies already have that automatically covered anyways. Characteristics, this one's a little trickier, so you should store all your materials, all your fabric compositions, all your BOMs somewhere in a safe place, because the challenge here is that you have to store all of this for 10 years. So your product team will know about this anyway when they develop products, but the challenge is you have to store it cleanly and in an organized way, so that even in 5 years when somebody comes, some market authority comes to you and wants to know about all this, you can present it. And then the most challenging piece is the risk assessment itself and the mitigation efforts. So this is what we just talked about. You need to document what we just talked about in some shape or form so that you can prove to authorities that you've done your homework. Now, real world examples. You can see, and this is from work that we've done with some of our clients, you can see up here, for example, a risk. Let's start with the bottom one. We have identified for this client, for example, we identified certain standards and regulations that apply to their products anyway. And then we've categorized that etc. And then after that, we've done an additional risk analysis where we've identified other potential hazards that were not necessarily covered by the standards, regulations, and standards down here. And then the technical documentation, well, again, that's why I said you can think of a Google Drive folder. You can just think of some folder structure. This is how it looked like for one of our clients, for example, where we just gathered all the details in one place. A big piece in fashion to make sure you're compliant and your products are safe is lab testing. And so when we talk about, for example, you can see in here, for example, these REACH and POPs test certificates. So that's something that will apply to pretty much every company that's on the webinar today. You have to ensure that your products are free of chemical substances, you have to do testing. And there are a few common pitfalls with that. I think the most common one is that you rely on your suppliers to provide those documents. They are not compliance experts. So especially if you are a younger company then that's what we often see, that your supplier may give you some certificates, but they have not been verified and they may not be correct and they may not even cover the relevant materials. So that's something where brands often fall short. Unverified reports, as I just said, is also a very common one. Suppliers will send you reports, but they are not verified. They're potentially not real. And unfortunately, we see it more often than you would think, that suppliers, even if you have a long-standing relationship with them, that they'll send you incorrect reports. And sometimes it's not even their fault. It's sub-suppliers providing them with incorrect reports. And then lastly, I just want to point out, I think sometimes we speak to fashion teams, product design teams, and they say, well, our supplier is certified by XYZ, and they have a SEDEX certificate. But this is just the supplier certification proving that they adhere to certain social standards, environmental standards, etc. It doesn't prove that your product is safe and compliant, and that's what you have to do. Yeah, Sebastian, anything to add here?
No, I think that's clear.
Okay, perfect. Then let's just wrap things up. So we've gone through some of the key obligations that you need to know about, all the bold ones. And obviously, in 30 minutes, it's hard to get into too much detail, but I hope this has given you a bit of a high-level overview of the things that have changed now with GPSR and the things that you have to be aware of. Sebastian, do we have questions?
Yes, I already answered, and we are frequently chatting through some labeling issues and the EU responsible needs. And of course, the EU responsible must be placed in the EU, because there must be the attention behind, there must be a company which is catchable and responsible in the specific market. That means an EU responsible, authorized responsible must be placed in the EU, because authorities want to go and ask for questions, for technical documents. And this is the link to the manufacturer, which is outside of the EU market. So, okay, EU rep must be placed in the EU and it must be displayed on the item. It's not 100% regulated, but my recommendation is to use these EU rep symbol and then the address with the company who has a written contract with you sitting outside of the EU and sending your items with these labeling into the EU. There are some different scenarios. You can use a EU rep, which is a third party service provider, or you use an importer address. That could be also a third party, another company or distributor maybe, but they are responsible as an importer, and an importer has more obligations as an EU representative. Or you can use, of course, your entity, your daughter entity, due to if you have something like that and located in the EU, then you can use your own company, your own brand, maybe sitting in Paris or in Brussels or in Berlin. That is also a way what you can solve these requirements, and that must be displayed then on the item besides of your UK name. So once more, you have the UK address, and besides of that must be an importer address, or you have the UK address, and besides of that you can use an EU rep address.
Yeah. Cool. I think there's one question in the chat. Will we still have to do this if we were still part of the EU, or is this a result of Brexit? That's an interesting question. So I mean, every European company has to comply with this. So it's regardless of Brexit. It doesn't have anything to do with Brexit. Thanks to Brexit, you currently don't have to comply with GPSR within the UK, although I know that's also something that's being discussed at the moment, whether the UK also adopts.
There's a question, how can we find an EU representative? That should be a more experienced company. In the past, there was some students or something like that. They earn some money and they give their name as an EU representative. In the future, there will be more approved and getting more investigated by authorities too. There are some service providers. Jonas, do you have already some where you're cooperating with? I can offer some names or some links to you, and you can spread it out to your audience.
Yeah, absolutely. Edge Comply offers this service, obviously, as the one-stop shop we're trying to be. We offer that service. Yeah, you're right. But you're right, Sebastian. This is interesting. That also because of this new EU product liability directive that's coming into force. I feel like right now there's a lot of small shops that are offering this service, but I think especially as this new directive becomes effective, it's going to get harder for. You're poorly served if you go with one of those because they'll not be able to withstand pressure.
Exactly. You pointed that out, the new product liability directive, which must be implemented in each member state until 26th of December 2026. So we have still some time, but then importers, EU representatives are also liable for the products. And that will be clear out the market a bit from these unserious companies. And that's why it makes sense to work with service providers like Edge Comply, which know what they are doing.
We have approached the 30-minute mark. Just a bonus that I want to share with everyone who's on the webinar. And by the way, we'll answer all the questions that you've got on the chat. If we haven't answered them yet, we'll answer them afterwards by email. We've got your email addresses. But one thing I want to share with you, because we've got a special bonus for everybody who's on the webinar. If you feel like it's time for you to get somebody in who takes care of your product safety and compliance from start to finish, that's exactly what we do at Edge Comply. So we call this our compliance implementation sprint. It's usually a 6 to 8 weeks project where we make sure your compliance is rock solid. Covers everything from GPSR to label and packaging review. And we can cover not only Europe, but international markets, whether that's US, Canada, UK itself, or other markets around the world. And we'll make sure you have, everything's taken care of. And just to give you an example of how this has looked like for other clients. So this is VaultX, another company from the UK. Before the project, they were pretty unclear what product safety and compliance obligations they had. They were, in fact, unknowingly violating regulations. So they had incorrect labels, they had no documentation, and they had overlooked safety regulations. And then after the project, we came in, we've gone through the process with them, and now they are fully compliant in all these 5 markets. And the way we do this, it's pretty straightforward. You just tell us what markets you want to cover. Do you just want to cover the EU, UK, US, etc.? We get on a kickoff call, you share your basic product details with us, and we then do everything from identifying safety standards to reviewing your labels. You can see it down here. We'll annotate exactly, or we'll tell you exactly what needs to happen. We'll communicate with your suppliers to collect all the right test reports, and then we'll compile everything into a compliance documentation. To get started, it's very, so the bonus we have, which I think is pretty incredible. I'm not sure if anybody else offers that in the market, but we have a money back guarantee for everybody who's on the webinar. If we don't find any issues in your current compliance setup, you get a 90% refund of the project cost. So if you're on the fence and you're thinking, I'm not sure if we are maybe already compliant, I think this is a pretty compelling offer to say, let's just do the project. And if we are, great, then it was almost for free. And if we're not, then it was worth spending the money. We can't do this for everybody, but we can do it for up to 5 companies. If you fill out a form that I'll just pop in the chat as we speak. So please just take a look at this form, very simple type form. Just go on there, it takes 15 seconds, fill out your first name, last name, phone number, email address, and then we'll get you a quote that's customized to you and your portfolio, and then we can start that project within 1 week. All right, cool. Sebastian, I think that's it. I think we've covered quite a bit of ground here.
Yes, I'm still answering something in the chat, so I'm still available. Some minutes if it's okay with you.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, the chat stays open, by the way, just as a hint for everybody. So even when I end the event, the video shuts off, you can still chat with us. And yeah, we'll make sure to cover as many questions as we can. Okay. Sebastian, I think, you know what? I'll just keep the video running because why not? If we're
No
on here.
problem. No problem. We still have 28 people here in the chat.
Yeah. Cool. And yeah, it's good. Great that you had an eye on the chat, Sebastian, because there is this questions tab, which not too many have used. Everybody's using the chat function. It's just more convenient, I suppose. Yeah, interest. I'm just commenting on some things that you're saying here, Sebastian. You keep writing, but yeah, interesting question by Josephine. What does the EU responsible person do? Yeah, they are really the facilitator, mediator between the EU market authorities and the brands. I think one thing that is maybe makes it easier to understand why the EU, the policymakers, decided to implement this rule with the EU responsible person is that a common challenge they face is that there are Asian manufacturers or Asian brands that sell straight into the EU to EU consumers. And then obviously if there is a safety incident, market authorities have struggled to get in touch with the relevant person at that Asian brand. And that's why they've now implemented this rule, which affects everybody who's not in the EU. So it affects UK brands just as much as it affects Asian companies.
The thing is that one responsible company, one must be placed in the market in these kind of internal markets where the items are sold. That means if you importing to the US market, to US America, then you have to have a responsible company there. If you go into the EU, you have somebody there. If you want to sell from EU to UK, you need also a UK representative. So each market needs a responsible company where authorities can link up, where consumers can link up. It must be identifiable and catchable for liability reasons also.
Yeah. So if we currently, good question about Adil, Sebastian. So if we currently do not have an EU RP and safety info sewn into existing stock that already exists, we are unable to ship to EU. That's correct, unless the inventory is already in Europe, right?
Yeah, exactly. That was my answer in the Q&A section. If you have already stock in the EU with the old labeling before the GPSR was coming into force mid of December last year, then you can take Article 51 and you can sell out your items. But now we have a new first placing into the market. The import is seen as first placing into the market. That means you have to fulfill the requirements of the GPSR. And that means relabeling in somehow cases.
Yeah.
To double check that it needs to be displayed in all official languages of each country is, as this would be 20 in my company, we sell underwear until now. Yes, you sell underwear. That means that these are textiles according to Textile Labeling Regulation 10 from 2011. That means you have to give the fabrics in all of the languages of your selling countries. You have to follow, but on the other hand, I see no warnings or safety advices according to underwear on this point. So the fabrics must be in these 24 languages if you sell it in each country and you don't sort it before.
Yeah, true. That would be a workaround then. Yeah, but obviously that's unusual.
And you can associate with a new brand in the same market. Yes, if they are willing. You spread liability, of course. You have to make a supplier contract and have to declare that you follow all the EU rules as Jonas already displayed. That means REACH, POP regulation and chemical material compliance, but maybe also textile labeling regulations, Also, extended producer responsibilities is a topic. That means packaging, WEEE, batteries regulation. All these additionally landscape of product compliance must be fulfilled, and that must be a part of somehow of an agreement with an EU brand or with your daughter company placed in the EU.
What's your take on Josephine's second question? And it's not a question, it's a complaint. How are small businesses supposed to compete with these rules? I completely agree.
Yeah. This is the problem in the market, and small and medium-sized companies struggling quite a lot. Big companies can solve this because they have big departments with a lot of compliance manager. But this is the business of Edge Comply, to help out companies to bring the items compliant into the market. And it's getting more and more complex, that's for sure. And that's why it makes sense to go this way, to make prevention, because recall and destruction in the market, that was almost more costly than prevention. And of course, you have to take some money to make it workable, to make it marketable, your item. But once you understood the framework, I think that could be easy. And Edge Comply is somebody who's working with a lot of compliance and safety specialists, and can give you this extensive and expensive knowledge for a good offer, in my opinion.
Yeah, but I think that's one of the. It's interesting, the GPSR, because sometimes when you have these new regulation, then the brands, companies, they become afraid because they think they now have to comply with all these regulations, and then it turns out that the EU decides that it's only applicable to companies over 1,000 employees, for example. With GPSR, it's pretty radical. It's really everybody. So where can I find the EU authorized representative rep symbol that you mentioned? Tom, I think so. There's no symbol. We can maybe go back there.
I can give you a link from the ISO Association where you can got a lot of symbols, and this is also used for medical devices regulation. And I can share, if you want to, the link here. Normally, you have to pay. You have to pay an amount using the symbol, but a fee. But here you can see an ISO overview for a lot of pictograms which can be used, and also the EC. It's EC rep, but new it will be EU rep symbol, where you have the pictogram and can rework and use it for your business. But anyhow, you don't have to use this pictogram. You can only name the EU company there.
Yeah, so that's the thing. So most of most of our clients, they just write EU authorized representative, and then below that so there's no symbol that they use for that. They just have to put on the address. Luke is asking how does this work with existing stock? I have over 10,000 units in stock and do not have time resources to relabel. Thanks for the webinar. Yeah, thanks, Luke, for the question. Yes, so that's the reality if you want to import it into the EU/Northern Ireland.
The reality is the same vice versa. If you want to send to UK, it's the same rule, and you have to prepare yourself. There was a transitional period where the GPSR was published in the official European journal, and then you have 18-month time to adjust the labeling, to edit something, to add something, and the time period is over right now. So it's too late. Edge Comply has to be informed earlier, so to say, or we all have to inform earlier, or you yourself have to inform earlier. Now you can only edit afterwards, but it's not the failure of Edge Comply or Fox Compliance or consultants agencies. It's the failure of the legislator who closed the gap a bit for importers or for manufacturers places outside of the EU market. But anyhow, the deadline was 12th of December last year at 12 o'clock PM.
Yeah. And I think maybe in retrospect, the policymaker should have done a better job at communicating that to brands.
Yeah, exactly.
Because there was a transitional period between, I think, 2023 and 2024, but yeah, that has obviously passed now. But yeah. Okay, cool. Sebastian, I think we've got it all covered. For everybody who's still on the webinar, Adil is typing. Let's wait for Adil to type out his question, and then we can see if there's. Okay, cool. Adil, appreciate it. And no more question. All right. Thanks so much, everybody. If you have any more questions, please feel free to text us on jonas@edgecomply.com. And then I'll loop in Sebastian. I'll loop you in if there's anything where we need your expertise. Other than that, thanks so much for joining. And Josephine, can you send costs, please? Yes, I have you. Josephine, have you filled out the form above? Then I'll happily do that. But yeah, thanks so much, everybody. And Sebastian, thanks so much for joining us. I'll see you soon.
See you soon.